Hi, my name is David, and I am the one-man show behind all the content you see here at Sellsword Arts. And yes, I have seen Shadiversity's response video to me. I've been debating what I wanted to do. If I wanted to make a point-by-point rebuttal like he did, if I wanted to just ignore it, and I've kind of come to the conclusion that I think Shad misunderstood the point of my video, and that led him to make a premise for his video based on that misunderstanding. So today, we're gonna clear some things up. So at the beginning of Shad's video, he says that the sword community has been attacked by me, which makes me feel like he doesn't feel like I'm in the sword community. So how about this? Why don't we have a public live stream? I'll bring some of my instructors, you can bring your co-presenters, and we can clear up any misunderstandings. In the first few minutes of Shad's video, he lays out his premise, and it's based on his interpretation of these two quotes. This one, if you don't do the art, you cannot talk about how to do the art. And this one. But today I want to talk to you guys about what makes good sword content and who you should and shouldn't listen to and why. He comes to the conclusion that I'm saying you shouldn't watch other content creators and you shouldn't talk about swords unless you fence. The meaning of my words, both now and in their original context in my video, are that while you should definitely enjoy pop culture and fantasy swordsmanship content, like I encourage in the video, you should also be able to understand the difference between that and the reality of how swords and swordsmanship work. And if you're putting yourself forward as an authority on swords and swordsmanship and how they actually function, you should probably use them. The purpose of my original video was to help educate my followers on the difference between content that's made purely for fantasy and fun and content that's made to help educate them on the way the sword is actually used. In this context, where I'm trying to help my followers discern between fantasy and educational content, the word listen doesn't mean don't watch somebody else's stuff. It means whose advice should you take about how to use the sword. Anime, video games, pop culture, and all of those things are not accurately representing swordsmanship. It's cool, it's fun, and it's enjoyable to watch, but that's not the way that swords would have actually been used. Most of it's focused on looking cool, doing cool choreography, and there's nothing really wrong with that, like I said before, and I'm gonna say that over and over again in the video. And the last thing that I want to say is, it's not bad to love fantasy and anime and video games and things like that. I love them, I play them, I watch them. So how do you, the viewer, know when a presenter is worth listening to? If they're talking about how to use a sword, they should use a sword. They should fence. Not everybody has to go to a tournament and win gold to be worth listening to. I fence and train under a number of different people who don't compete in tournaments because they don't like to, but they're still amazing instructors and fencers. No, they have to do the art. If you don't do the art, you cannot talk about how to do the art. Now, there are people who are historians who don't fence, and they have valid insights about the history of these weapons, but they don't have an understanding of how they would have been used. You cannot understand how these things would have been used just by studying books. You have to pick one up and you have to do it. People have a hard time differentiating between that fantasy and the reality of how these things would work because they just don't have enough exposure to them. But if you watch good content, you're critical of the presenter, you understand how experiments are formulated, and you check out awesome sword channels, you can learn more about how these things are actually used, and that'll lead to you enjoying swords and swords media even more. Now, I think I might still get some pushback on this point, but I stand firm on it. If you do not practice the art of swordsmanship, you should not present yourself as an authority on the art of swordsmanship. Just like if you want useful opinions on a paintbrush, you ask a painter. If you want useful opinions about the way a sword works, you need to ask a fencer. What is fencing? Well, it's fighting with swords. It's kind of a universal term. It comes from the Latin root defensa, which means defend. And if you look at something like the Book of Five Rings, they even reference fencing in that in the English translation. Now, I specifically do historical European martial arts, and even more specifically, I do longsword, saber, and rapier. And the reason that I don't make a lot of content about eskrima or kendo is because I wouldn't have useful opinions on those. And within the context of historical European martial arts, the best approximation we have is using steel swords with a certain amount of protective gear. The reason I feel the need to make this video is to clear up this misunderstanding, and also because some of my videos were clipped in such a way that it loses necessary context, which reflects poorly on my character in such a way that I feel the need to defend myself. The first clip is me test cutting. So I think the problem that we see when people are trying to justify this is they do test cuts on inanimate objects. And it's being used in Shad's video to prove that I do tests that test out whether a technique works or not against an inanimate object. However, test cutting isn't to prove whether a technique works, it's simply a test of edge alignment, and for me, it's just kind of for fun. Additionally, this is one of, if not the first times that I ever cut. I feel it's very important for me to show both my successes and my failures on this channel so my audience can see my growth and understand where my skills are.
I haven't done a lot of cutting on this, so get ready to see me fail.
It's not exactly what I wanted, but it's a pretty nice cut. I probably need to add some weight down here. Let's see if we do it again. Okay, so the stand's pretty loose. I'm not in love with this stand, if I'm honest. I'm probably gonna stuff something in here. It's making the cuts a lot harder. Yeah, the stand's gotta get some weights. Let's try this again. Got some weights. Again, new at this. So, okay. The second clip that Shad uses is one of me using a foam sword after I make the point that foam swords are not a good approximation of steel swords and shouldn't really be used for a test of whether or not a technique works. Or they spar with foam. However, this clip's taken out of context because in the video that he's showing a clip from, I very explicitly at the beginning and the end talk about how this is not a true test of this technique because we are limited in the usage of foam swords because true steel greatswords are too dangerous to fight with. We're very clear in that video, and here's a clip of that. I do have real steel montantes. Realistically, you cannot spar with them. The problem is, it's frankly not safe to spar with. I do love these padded sword trainers, but they are not the same as real swords. We just wanna get that caveat out of the way because we think it's really important that you know that this is not a 100% recreation of that. So after we did our experiment, first we have to note that these swords are not steel swords. They do not react like a steel sword would. This is a thought experiment. It is not a conclusive, definitive experiment that proves anything. It's just kind of like, what would maybe happen? Furthermore, I've made multiple videos talking about how I love foam swords and I use them all the time in my training, but they are not steel and they are not a good approximation for when you're testing whether or not a technique is viable or not. This is a padded longsword and it is one of my favorite training tools because it means I get to do low gear sparring, meaning I don't have to put on my whole hot, sweaty kit to get some sparring or some practice reps in. It's also great if you don't have the money to buy a full kit. You can buy one of these in a mask and you're good to go and start sparring or practicing with your friends. Now I have to tell you, it's not the same as a steel sword. The weight's different, the way the blade moves and interacts with other swords is different, but it's still really good to get some practice reps in. As for the comments section, yes, I have been deleting comments because we've been getting hundreds of comments that are inappropriate, slurs, and other things that are not allowed on my PG channel. I'm out in public, I go to a lot of events, tournaments, Renaissance festivals, workshops, and I meet my fans, and I don't want to be associated with that kind of negativity. Now, I welcome constructive criticism, but as I said before, I am a one-man show, and since Shad's video went live, I have been inundated with comments that are disrespectful, hateful, and made in bad faith, and I do not have the time to respond to them, and my YouTube is supposed to be a positive and family-friendly place, so I will be deleting those. So where do we go from here? Well, I'm gonna keep making content the way I always have been. I'm not gonna let any of this change what I do, and I encourage you guys to keep consuming content the way that you have been. Enjoy whatever you like, but I still encourage you to use critical thinking skills to understand what it is that you're viewing.